And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Merry Christmas. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska aviation weather outlook on this Christmas Day 2024. And to set the stage for the outlook for Thursday into Friday, this Christmas Day, an area of low pressure is coming up out of the North Pacific, bringing strong winds to areas of the southern western panhandle and along the Gulf Coast. Also, we have a low pressure out here through the eastern central Aleutians. It'll be swinging southeastward into the North Pacific, and it's the northerly flow on the backside of this low that is causing strong gale force winds across the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. We also have a strong northeast to northerly flow through the Bering Strait, the west side of the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island. And it will remain rather windy there here up through the day on Thursday, though some of the strongest winds have already occurred. And then there's a stationary front with colder air to the northwest across the west side of the state. And these areas of IFR conditions indicate lower cloud cover ceilings, some lower visibilities, and mainly light snow. And then we expect here for the panhandle at sea level along the Gulf Coast, it's going to be rain and breezy conditions. Low pressure is going to move up into the Gulf and back up across Prince William Sound early on Friday morning. So as we go through Thursday afternoon, we still have IFR conditions here, intercoastal mountains, northern portion of the panhandle, northeastern Gulf Coast, including Yakutat, and then a broad band of IFR conditions centered on Utqiagvik on down through the lower middle Yukon Valley, Bristol Bay, and the Alaska Peninsula. Still IFR conditions out over St. Lawrence Island by Friday morning. This does shift eastward because there is going to be some much colder air brush the north slope and Arctic coast this weekend. So this is pushing those IFR conditions along the Beaufort Sea coastline down through the central interior all the way to the Alaska Peninsula. And then as that low will be backing up into Prince William Sound, it may even spread some accumulating snow into the Anchorage Bowl. So there could be some flight delays there in through the Anchorage area early on Friday. And then for Friday afternoon, we do find MVFR conditions there in the southern part of the panhandle, still IFR in the north, areas around Prince William Sound, the eastern Kenai Peninsula, still looking at IFR conditions there, and then a pretty broad area of IFR conditions along the eastern half of the North Slope, Brooks Range, Arctic coast, all the way down through the upper Yukon Valley, and coming up against the north side there of the Alaska Range, and also IFR conditions along the Alaska Peninsula and southeast part of the Bering. So past conditions on Thursday, Anaktuvik Pass should generally be MVFR. You're going to have to fly further west, the western Brooks Range IFR, but Adigan Pass also MVFR, maybe even a little VFR, a little further east. Lake Clark and Merrill starts out with IFR within the passes there in the morning, then MVFR. Rainy Pass looking at MVFR conditions. Windy Pass, MVFR becoming VFR. And then as we head further east, Isabel Pass, MVFR also becoming VFR, but we'll have IFR south of the south entrance as you get down into the Copper River Basin. Mentasta Pass, same thing, MVFR becoming VFR on Thursday, but there will be IFR conditions across the Copper River Basin there on Thursday morning. Tanita Pass, IFR becoming VFR, and then Portage Pass, IFR conditions becoming VFR. And finally, the north end of the Panhandle, Chilkoot and White, generally IFR conditions will prevail, as will be the case across much of the Panhandle on Thursday. Freezing levels at the surface Thursday morning have dipped down into the western Aleutians, the lower southeast part of the Bering Sea, and then up into Cook Inlet, and then along the northern Gulf Coast into the inner channels of the Panhandle. Freezing levels aloft, though, nothing too notable of warm moisture coming in aloft, but we do find freezing levels up around 2,000 feet over the southwest Panhandle, and then you have to get southeast of Haida Gwaii, almost down toward Vancouver Island to see freezing levels aloft at 4,000 feet. Nevertheless, there will be areas of precipitation, some rain along the Gulf Coast into the Panhandle, but in the mountains, snow. We're finding moderate icing possible in areas of the Panhandle above 6,000 feet, 4,000 feet far northern Panhandle and along the northern Gulf Coast. Also in the far north, along this frontal stationary front, we may find areas of moderate icing along the central portion of the Arctic coast and north slope above 3,000 feet, and then also an area of moderate icing in the lower Yukon Delta above 4,000 feet on Thursday. Upper level winds 30,000 feet, not especially strong for this time of year. If I bring it down to mid-levels, 700 millibars, a little better story. We have that low pressure circulation that's pulling back to the northwest across the Gulf, so southwest flow ahead of it as high as 35 to 55 knots as we get in the northern panhandle and up into the southwest area of the Yukon territory. Back to the west, we have a broad northerly flow over the central lower Bering Sea and the Aleutians. That shows up better at 3,000 feet. A belt of winds 35 to as high as 45 knots along the western Seward Peninsula between St. Lawrence Island and the lower Yukon Delta, and then down across the lower half of the Bering Sea and the central eastern Aleutians. We find northerly gale force winds there at 35 knots at 3,000 feet. And then this area of stronger winds along the northeastern Gulf Coast outside of Yakutat Bay and the north end of the Panhandle, upwards of 45 knots. So that's where there will be moderate turbulence, quite a bit along areas of the northern Gulf Coast into the western Panhandle, surface to 6,000 feet. There will also be potential for low-level wind shear because of the quick turning of the winds as you go up with height. Then back to the west with that broad northerly flow through the Bering Strait and all the way down across the Aleutians, we find widespread considerable moderate turbulence along areas, say Point Hope, Cape Lisburne, down through the Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, across St. Matthew, down through the Pribilofs, and then finally across much of the Aleutian chain. We expect moderate turbulence on Thursday, surface to 3,000 feet.